tonight we have a special program. We're going to be talking about the heavenly signs, and we have with us Sandy. Sandy, let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to spend quite a bit of time tonight talking about the constellations, and that makes a lot of people nervous because they associate the study of the stars sometimes with astrology, which has nothing to do with what we believe is the true zodiac. Now, we're going to talk about the zodiac today, and practically every civilization had their own version of the zodiac. So, Sandy, let's find out first what God says about what the stars are for, what the moon and the sun was used for. Sandy, I'm going to read Genesis 1 and verse 14 here.
Yes.
And God said, "Let there be light in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs." Now, it says the lights, which is plural, in the heavens was used for signs. And so that's really what we wanted to zero in on. That word signs, it's a Hebrew word, and it actually means a signal. It can mean a flag, beacon, a monument, evidence, marker, or miracle, or token. So it's something that's going to cause us to draw our attention to something in the sky.
Well, I think it means what it says. I think it means signs. I think that Yahweh is showing us, if we look into the heavens, usually it points back down to us.
Right.
to give us a message from him. And another thing, since you're bringing up this about the people being worried about astrology, I'd like to say something about the Mazzaroth, because long before the adversary, Hasatan, gave us these Babylonian practices of astrology, for example, horoscopes, the ancient Hebrews called the study of the stars the Mazzaroth, which is Yahweh's time clock. Yeah, and there is a scriptural references to this, and it's in Job 38, 32 through 33. Can you bring forth Mazzaroth in his appointed time? Or can you guide Arcturus with his sons? Do you know the ordinances of heaven? Can you set the dominion thereof in the earth?
I'm glad you brought those scriptures out because I think people need to see the importance of that. We know that Daniel was an astronomer. It plainly speaks about him studying the stars in scripture. And we also know that in the book of Jasher, Abraham was also listed as an astrologer. And many people do not know that.
Absolutely.
And I just want to reiterate that because it says the lights in the firmament in heaven were used for signs. And I think that's really important because he's trying to tell you he's going to use them to communicate with us. And of course, today, Sandy, nobody even looks at the stars because it's so hard to even see them. If you lived in the city, you can't even see them, can you?
Right. It's pretty difficult.
So, it's not something that draws people's attention because we don't know anything about them. We think of it as being very mysterious. But God wrote many things in the stars. And the Hebrew name for the zodiac that was used centuries ago was called the Mazzaroth, and that's what Sandy was alluding to a little earlier.
Absolutely. And also there's a couple more scriptures that go with what you're talking about in the fact that the Mazzaroth is biblical. One is in Job 38:31, and it says, can you bind the sweet influences of Pleiades or loose the bands of Orion? Psalms 19:1 says, the heavens declare the glory of Elohim, and their expanse the work of his hands. Psalm 147:4 says, he counts the number of the stars. He gives names to them all. So this shows that Yahweh, our Elohim, he's the creator. He's the one that designed all of this with a purpose. We don't need to worry about it if the enemy comes and tries to pervert what he does. We just need to get to the answers from the scriptures and see what he's telling us.
Now, I also want to cover Matthew 24, verse 30. And Sandy, could you read that for us?
That is verse 29. It's 29. And immediately after the distress of those days, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give its light, and the stars shall fall from the Shemayim, and the powers of the Shemayim shall be shaken.
Now, Yeshua said that in the time of the end, there would be a sign in the skies. Psalms 19, verse 1 through 4. And the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. The day unto day utters speech, and night unto night shows knowledge. So he's saying every night you will get knowledge. So he's going to talk about how this happens. There is no speech, there's no language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their mouth is to the end of the world. To them has he set a tabernacle for the sun. So he's really saying that he communicates with us. He doesn't do it always with speech, but he communicates with us, and there's a language that goes on in the stars. And that's what the point he's trying to bring home in Psalms 19. I think that's really interesting. Now, Sandy, you want to read Luke 21, verse 11 for us?
And there shall be great earthquakes in various places, and scarcities of food, and deadly diseases. And there shall be terrors and great signs from the Shemayim, and there shall be great tempests.
Okay, so he's saying there's going to be great signs from the heavens. So he's telling you at the end time the things that are going to occur, and that's Luke 21 talks about the end time. And he's really saying that one of the things that will occur is signs in the heavens. Well, we're beginning to see much of that now with the blood moons and some of the things that we're going to be talking about a little later.
You know, Linda, and that I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really like the way that you don't set dates. I think that's really important. We can't know the exact dates for these things, but on the other hand, you know, people want to know when these things are going to occur. And to go back to Matthew 24, which you read, it's telling us, Matthew 24:34, this generation shall not pass till all be fulfilled. So
Exactly.
yes, and that, you know, we need to ask, what generation was Yeshua referring to? Verse 33 says, so you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the door. Yeshua couldn't have been talking to his disciples. This was a future context. Yeshua was referring to the end time generation, the generation that had the nuclear capability to destroy mankind. Yeshua also said of the end time generation that unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. Only this end time generation, in this time only, could that prophecy be fulfilled. Once these things are set in motion, all things are going to occur within the lifetime of one generation. The generation that will see the arrival of the specific 3.5 years that ends this present evil age and will restore the Malkut Shemayim, the kingdom of heaven.
Right, and it goes into specifics and talks about what the signs are going to be. And I'm going to read this, Revelations 12, verse 4, and it says, his tail drew a third of the stars from heaven, and they cast them down to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman. The part I wanted to zero in on is that 1/3 of the stars would be cast down to heaven. Now, that's also in reference to angels, but it's also in reference to a physical event that happens, that many of the stars will fall from heaven onto the earth. Now, I think it's important to know that sometimes God uses signals, and he uses events in the heavens to let people know that there's something he wants to draw their attention to. And on November 3rd, 1833, there was a major event that occurred in the heavens, and it happened in Canada. It was seen in Canada, United States, and Britain. And it came out of the constellation Leo. I guess they called it shooting stars, and they apparently said that there was over 1 billion shooting stars that night on November 3rd, 1833. So God was trying to draw people's attention to something that he was about to do, and I think he was moving people into this era that we are always referred to as the end. And obviously this happened, you know, over 100 years ago, but God is trying to get his people prepared even way back then, I believe. So he's trying to show things in the heavens, and 1 million shooting stars in one day, and that's well recorded in history. I think that's amazing. Then we were talking about the Mazzaroth, and the Mazzaroth, we mentioned that it was God's timepiece. And the way that it basically works is that you have 48 constellations. Now, there used to be as many as 88, but now, according to Ptolemy, who was a famous geographer, he basically assigned 48 constellations, and those constellations are not all the ones we see today, because we only use the constellations, the 12 constellations that align with the sun. Now, as the sun passes through the heavens, it follows a path. It's going to go through these same constellations, and then when it finishes, it starts over again. It goes through the same constellations again. And these are 12 major constellations, and that's what we call the zodiac. Now, it's the same constellations, believe it or not, in every zodiac version. So the Arabian have their own zodiac, the Chinese have their own zodiac, Babylon had their own zodiac, and believe it or not, all the names of the stars and the images have stayed the same. They're in different languages, but they all have stayed the same. Now, the sun, the moon, the equinoxes, the planets are all in movement, but the stars are fixed and they don't move, or we don't really notice them as moving. And these constellations tell a story, and each story changes per month. So every month you have a different story. Now, I'm going to give you an example. The constellation keeps the same images and word meanings throughout the centuries. They have never changed. Now, I'm going to give you an example of that. The constellation of Virgo means virgin. Now, the Romans called it Virgo. The Hebrews called it Berthala. The Indians called it Tanya. And so it's the same word, but in different languages. All of these languages are the word for virgin. Now, the stars' names also stay the same. Now, in the Latin name for one of the stars in that same constellation is Spesa, which means seed. In the Mazzaroth, in Hebrew, that same star is the Zerah, which also means seed. Do you see what I'm saying? That this is one thing that did not get corrupted. The names and the images have stayed the same. That way you could always see what he's telling you in the sky. The brightest star in Virgo is called Spesa. We mentioned that. It means ear or seed. In Hebrew, it means Zerah, which means seed, or Zamak, which means branch. So this virgin that's in the sky, she has a branch in one hand and really an ear of corn in the other, which I think is really interesting. And the Messiah is always referred to as the branch, isn't he, Sandy?
Yes, many times.
Many times. And the stars in the constellation reinforce this message. Muteron means sun. So you see the word branch, the word sun, they have similar meanings. Now, the neighboring constellation, Coma, the meaning in Hebrew is the desired one. Do you see that no matter which language you're using, the stars have the same meaning?
Well, it just shows Yahweh's handiwork, just like the original Hebrew language was a pictorial language. What he wants to show us things and simplify. We're the ones that make things complicated.
Exactly. Now we're going to start with the constellation of Virgo. And by the way, Virgo is the constellation that occurs during the time between August 23rd and September 22nd. It comes right up to the fall festival. She is a representation of Dinah or Mary, and her name means hand, but she was always called the Virgin. In many languages, she was called the Virgin in the sky. She really represents Israel and all the nations of Israel, and of course she's going to have some representation for the church also. At the top of Virgo is another constellation which is called Leo. It is the lion, and it represents the Lion of Judah, and it also will represent the Messiah. Depending on what the story is, the meaning of the images can change, and I think that's what's interesting, is it's telling you a story. And so we have this story about this virgin that was in the heavens. Some interesting things happened at the time of the Messiah. There was a star, actually three stars move very close together, I should say, right before the birth of the Messiah and then after that time. Now, that is called the Star of Bethlehem. This is well recorded in history. We remember the story about the Magi coming because they saw the star in the heaven. Well, it's because it was an extremely bright star, because there was two or three stars that actually came together at that point and made a very bright star in the sky. And that has not happened since. They knew the orbit of Jupiter, and they knew that it only passed at this point once every 11 years. So they were looking for it. Now, there's another event that's going to start occurring, and it's going to be visible in the sky on September 23rd, 2017. And that is when Virgo actually has 9 stars above her head, which is Leo. And then she has 3 planets move into that area, making up the 12 stars. So they have never had, in the last 7,000 years, an alignment in Virgo with 12 stars. That has not happened in 7,000 years. Now, let's go ahead and read Revelations 12, verse 1.
There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cries, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered.
Okay, thank you. So what it's telling you here first is that there's going to be 12 stars at her head. That's Leo, which is 9, and 3 other planets. Now, like we said, that's never happened in 7,000 years. Now, at that point, the moon will be at her feet, and the sun will be at her shoulder. And so this event will occur on 9/23/2017. There's no doubt about it. At this point, the planet Jupiter, which represents the king planet, will actually move into the constellation of Virgo. He'll just move into that constellation, and he actually stays there for 41 weeks. He moves in on November 20th, 2016. He stays there exactly 9 months and 41 weeks. Now, Sandy, what is that in reference to?
This is so amazing, Linda. The planet Jupiter, of course, the king planet, which represents Yeshua, does go into the constellation Virgo, the bride, and is there for approximately the same time as the gestation period, and then comes out to be delivered from Virgo, from the mother, the bride, the church, however you want to reference the constellation Virgo. But this is an amazing thing that's getting ready to take place, and it is a definite sign showing us once again the return of our Messiah.
What's incredible about it is that it will come out on 9/23/2017, which is during the days of awe. Now, I'm going to take a second and explain. The Day of Trumpets starts on September 20th, 2017, the Day of Trumpets. Some people, depending on which calendar you celebrate, it may be before or after that date. We know that if it comes out on the 23rd, then it's going to be falling in the days of awe.
The days of awe are in between 2 of Yahweh's festivals and appointed times. And they picture, I believe, where tribulation will be upon the earth. It's called the times of awe for a reason.
Exactly. And it really is 10 days. It's the day between trumpets and atonement. And those 10 days referencing the 10 plagues of Egypt. They're symbolic of the 10 days of Egypt, which is a time of peril or a time of distress, or exactly what this virgin is going through. She's in pain to be delivered. And we know that Israel is referred to as a woman in travail, as if she's giving birth. And that represents a time we call Jacob's trouble or the tribulation. So this is referencing, I feel, that is the church, yes, the child is to be delivered, but it also is referencing that this woman is in travail or she's in tribulation. Is that not true, Sandy?
And yes, and I think that Joel 2:30 comes to mind. And I shall give signs in the Shemayim, the heavens, and upon the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun is turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the coming of the great and awesome day of Yahweh. And it shall be that everyone who calls on the name of Yahweh shall be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be an escape, as Yahweh has said, and among the remnant who Yahweh calls.
Exactly. Now, we mentioned Jupiter, and we said he was the king planet, and he's been the king planet before they called him Jupiter. Jupiter is just the name that the Romans gave him. But he, in the Mazzaroth, is also called the king planet. And so it's interesting because the constellation Leo, which is a lion, and it is representing the king of Judah, or it's representing the Messiah. The 9 stars are at the top of her head. Leo is at the top. Plus, you have Mercury, Mars, and Venus. Now, again, this has not happened before in history. We have never had this particular arrangement of stars in 7,000 years. I don't see how anybody could pass up understanding and seeing that. Now, the time of Jacob's trouble, I'm just going to read Isaiah 26, verse 17. It says, like as a woman with child that draws near the time of her delivery is in pain, and she cries out with her pangs, so have we been in thy sight, O Lord. So what he's saying, that this is basically describing Israel. And Israel is going to go through these birth pains, is she not? She's going to go through a terrible time we call the tribulation. And so let's make sure that you understand that I'm not talking about dates and setting dates here. Let's make that real plain. I'm saying that Yahweh, our Heavenly Father, is giving us a signal in 2017 to know things that are going to be coming down.
Oh, absolutely. But along with a lot of other things, we need to be following in the scriptures. We need to be mostly keeping our relationship right with him and finding out what he wants us to do about these things. He always gives his people warning, ample warning. And I think one of the problems is that people see these things occurring and nothing happens. So they just go on with, with their lives, not realizing that he gives us warnings beforehand so that we can prepare, so that we can turn back, so that we can repent. It's up to us to do that. We may not know the day or the hour, but we can know the times and the seasons. And one of the ways to make sure that we know is to stay on his calendar, his appointed calendar, the one that he created that shows us the Sabbath and the festivals. That way we're going to be in alignment with what he's doing.
Right, exactly.
We will return to Setting History Straight after this commercial break. Please listen to this broadcast live every week on Hebrew Nation Radio, where we unveil the true history of Israel. Our broadcast time is Saturday, 7 p.m. Pacific, Sundays, 6 p.m. Pacific. We now return to Setting History Straight with Linda Watson.
And so now let's talk about the meaning of these planets. I think their names are very significant. And the first one that is going to be in the constellation of Virgo is Mercury. Now, the god of Mercury was the messenger god. He was the messenger god in the zodiac, and he was the messenger god in the Mesroth. And so I think that's very interesting. Now, Israel's top messenger is Michael. He's called an archangel. I don't have time in this program to go through that. If you haven't seen that information, you might want to do a little research. But he is referred to as the protector of Israel. And he's an archangel. And the word angel itself, if you look it up in the Hebrew, means messenger. So this planet Mercury is representing a messenger. He's representing an angel. Now, the next one is Venus, the morning star. Can you read Revelations 22, verse 16 for us, Sandy?
I, Yahweh, have sent my messenger to witness these to you in the assemblies. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star.
Right. So the bright and morning star is the name for Venus. And so Venus is representing the Messiah again. That's another interpretation. So Venus is called that morning star. Now Mars has always been the planet called the war planet. The mythology around Mars has always associated Mars with war. And Jupiter we've talked about, we said that represents the king planet, which would be the Messiah. And Saturn actually represents Satan. Saturnalia, it is actually the celebration that the Romans did. Saturnalia, which was the worship of Saturn. And it's more toward the worship of Satan. We need to know the meaning of those planets and what role they play, because they are going to be moving in and out of the constellations that we're going to be talking about next. So now, and let's go ahead and talk about the next constellation that is very near Virgo. So, Sandy, can you read Revelations 12, verse 4 for us?
And his tail draws a third of the stars of the Shemayim and throws them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born.
Exactly. Now, what it's telling you is that the woman is going to give birth, and who is near her? It's the dragon. The dragon is representing Satan. And it says the dragon is waiting for the baby to be delivered so he can devour that baby as soon as he's born. Now, that's symbolic, right? But if you look at the constellation that is at her feet, and there's a constellation at her feet, and it's called Serpens, Serpes. And Serpens is a snake constellation. And he's being held by Falcus is the man. He's standing at the feet of the Virgo, and he's holding the snake. He's keeping the snake from the actual baby. Now, this is in reference to this verse that we're talking about that Sandy just read. Because Sandy just read that in the stars in the sky that there's a dragon waiting for the baby to be delivered. So in this constellation Virgo, right on the side of this constellation, you have another constellation with Serpes, which is a snake. He's waiting for that child to be delivered. Is this not unbelievably amazing, Sandy?
It is, Linda. And what you're doing is, even though we don't have all the puzzle pieces in here yet, it's showing that the Mazzaroth is a 12-step prophecy through all of these. It's a clock that's counting down to the end of the age and the establishment of Messiah, his kingdom on the earth. That's what this is showing.
You are so right. It's actually playing out a message or a story in the sky. And I just think it's incredible that all of these constellations are lining up like this in 2017. Now, if you want to see more information on this, I got most of my information from Scotty Clark, who is on YouTube. You can go out and Google him and see some of his information. I'm not in agreement, by the way, with everything he teaches, but I am in agreement with the constellation events that he actually shows in his videos. So you might want to take a look at some of that. I'm also going to try and put this presentation out on my website, which is 12tribehistory.com. Now, the next constellation we want to talk about is Libra. Okay, she represents scales. She appears in the month of Tishri, and she represents the eternal justice that presides over the universe. But it also is very interesting because there's a scripture in Daniel 5, verse 27. In the King James Version, it says balances. You have been weighed on the balances and found wanting. It's the same principle. It's what it's basically telling you is that we have already gone through a judgment. We're getting down to the tribulation time frame. We are in judgment by that time. And as scripture tells you, there's a plumb line set, and you're going to be on one side or the other of that plumb line.
And Linda, that's a good place to bring in. You've been talking a lot about the number 12 in the Hebrew, which is the Lamed. Since you brought that up about scales and judgment, the Lamed stands in the center of the Hebrew alphabet. It is the tallest letter, and its root form forms the words to teach or study. There's a quote here that I have from Rabbi Abraham Twersky. He goes on to say that the shape of the Lamed is compared to a watchtower of a lighthouse. But one other thing about the Lamed, it has a numerical value of 30. The numerical value in the Gematria is the number 30. 30 means that all authority belongs to Yeshua, but it also means that he chastises us, which is what we're talking about now going into the tribulation.
And so the point that they're trying to make with Libra is that you are going to be at that point judged. Now, there's 2 or 3 stars in the constellation of Libra that have some unique meanings to their name. One star means redemption, or another star means purchased, another price is sufficient. Libra starts around September 23rd through the 22nd. And that's usually around the fall holiday season. So he's telling you that they're going to be judged at this point. Now, let's get back to the book of Revelations again, and we'll start again and read verse 7 and 9.
And there came to be fighting in the Shemayim. Michael and his messengers fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his messengers fought. And the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who leads all the world astray. He was thrown to the earth, and his messengers were thrown out with him. That's also in Daniel 11.
Thank you. So now there's a lot of information right here. One is that the dragon is called the old serpent. Well, that's in reference to the dragon being a snake, which we've already made reference to in this constellation, did we not? And it says he deceives the whole world and he's going to be cast down. But before he's cast down, there's actually a fight that goes on between Michael the archangel, remember, and his angels, and they're going to fight with the dragon, which is Satan. And you see that in the verse 7 that we just talked about here. Now, let's mention that because it's really critical. There's another constellation that starts occurring about this same time, and that constellation is called Draco, D-R-A-C-O, and it's a snake. So here's another snake, another constellation that's a snake in the heavens, and it starts occurring in the month of November, October-November time frame. And it says it stays near the constellation of Hercules. It says that it usually winds its way between the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, and it has shooting stars that come out of Draco's head. And this starts usually happening in the month of October and November. I think that's really interesting. And I'm reading this from what the astronomers tell us happened with this constellation. This is the constellation that usually has shooting stars come out of it. Now, isn't that interesting that it says Satan uses his tail to sweep many of the angels to the earth? So I think that's interesting. Now, I'm going to go ahead and read this one, and this is a reference to Lucifer and Satan. Isaiah 14, verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which does weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thy heart, I will ascend to heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the north. Now that's really critical because he says, I'm going to go sit my throne in the north. Now, this is what's interesting about this constellation Draco, is that it's located in the northern area of the sky, near Hercules. It's an absolute parallel. Your Heavenly Father is showing in the sky what is actually going on. This constellation is going to have stars shoot out of it, but it's also going to be in the north part of the sky, which is exactly where Lucifer said he was going to try and go sit. I think that's amazing when you see some of this stuff, isn't it? All right, the next constellation is Scorpio. And Scorpio, it is a actual scorpion. It actually means to bite. The word Scorpio means wound, conflict, or war. In the Coptic language, it means enemy. The stars are called, one of them is called Ateres, which means wounded, and the other one is Alara. Interesting names for these stars. Now I'm going to read this. Revelations 13, verse 3. And I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wandered after the beast. Now, Scorpio is talking about that time frame when this actual power that comes up is wounded. I think the tribe of Dan may have something to do with this because it says Dan shall be a serpent, by the way, an antler in the path that bites the horse's heel so that the rider falls back. So it's talking about in the story that in the sky is that this power that comes up gets bit and it has a deadly wound, but that deadly wound is healed. I think that's really interesting. Now, Sandy, many people know the story of the horses of Apocalypse, right? And can you tell us, everybody, just a little bit about the white horse?
Hail.
Revelation 6, 1
Yeah.
and 2.
And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures saying, like a sound of thunder, Come and see. And I looked and saw a white horse, and he who sat on it, holding a bow. And a crown was given to him, and he went out, overcoming and to overcome.
Right. He was a conquering horse. And so he's given a bow and a crown, right? And so what that basically means is he's given some kind of rulership.
Yes, I think that again we're seeing a reference. We, at the beginning of this teaching, we were covering Matthew 24. Now, if we go back to Matthew 24 or verse 5, I'll start in verse 4, and it says, And Yahweh answering said to them, Take heed that no one leads you astray. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Hamashiach, and they shall lead many astray. And this is talking about the white horse of false religion.
And it also can have a reference to the Antichrist, who's also going to lead them. So who is this man that sits on the white horse? And that's what we want to talk about in the next constellation. The next constellation, believe it or not, is Sagittarius. So let me tell you a little bit about Sagittarius, because he's a man, half horse, and he has a bow in his hand. Now remember that we just read that he would have a bow. Is that not correct? Now, let's take a few seconds here and find out what that bow represents. He's got a bow in his hand. He's an archer, isn't he?
Yes.
Okay, so let's read Genesis 21, and we'll start in verse 17.
And Elohim heard the voice of the boy, and the messenger of Elohim called to Hagar from the Shemayim and said to her, What is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for Elohim has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Arise, lift up the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I make a great nation of him. And Elohim opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And when she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the boy a drink. And Elohim was with the boy, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer.
This is in reference to Ishmael. Ishmael was dying in the desert when Abraham sent the concubines and Hagar and Ishmael away. And it calls him a what? An archer. And so this is in reference to the Arabs today. And the archer is a symbol for the Arabs because Ishmael is one of the tribes of the Arabs.
Well, also, I think in prophetic language, this is telling us that we are warned at the end time that Yahweh's people will be hunted. It refers to hunters coming after the people, and it's one of the ways that they will be brought back to the land.
Yes, Jeremiah 16:16. I think that's really interesting because this figure in the heavens, which is Sagittarius, Sagittarius is a constellation that occurs between November 22nd to December 21st. Now, that constellation has a man riding a horse. That horse has been bit in the heel by the scorpion. If you remember the story, I'm telling you the story as we go through here. And this man has a bow, which makes him an archer. He would represent the Arab nations. Sagittarius is showing a picture of the Antichrist, and he's somehow associated with the Arabs.
Linda,
Now, go ahead.
Linda, I don't know if you had planned on this, but what you're bringing to mind for me is Psalm 83, which is an ancient prophecy. O Elohim, do not remain silent. Do not be speechless, and do not be still, O El. For look, your enemies make an uproar, and those hating you have lifted up their head. They craftily plot against your people and conspire against your treasured ones. They have said, come, and let us wipe them out as a nation, and let the name of Israel be remembered no more. For they have conspired together with one heart. They have made a covenant against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, Moab and the Hagarites, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, Pelisheth with the inhabitants of Zior. Asher also has joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot, Selah. Do to them as to Midian, as to Sisera. Let us take possession of the pastures of Elohim for ourselves. O my Elohim, make them as whirling dust, as stubble before the wind. As a fire consumes a forest, and as a flame lights mountains on fire, so pursue them with your whirlwind, and frighten them with your storm. Fill their faces with shame, and let them seek your name, O Yahweh. Let them be ashamed and alarmed forever, and let them become abashed and perish. And let them know that you, whose name is Yahweh, you alone are the Most High over all the earth.
Very good. Now, under the sign of Sagittarius, we have a war going on that we alluded to. The war is between Michael and Satan. And this actually plays out. Now, I'm going to read this one. Chapter 12, verse 7 of Revelations. There was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. Now, on the date of 11/30/2017, Saturn, which represents Satan, starts moving its way toward Sagittarius. And Mercury comes very close to it and stays there for several days. It actually does what we call a conjunction. And Mercury, remember, means messenger or angel. Angel, the word angel means messenger. This is demonstrating to us that there is a war going on between Satan and Mercury. So this is showing here that these two planets move out of Virgo and they start moving towards Sagittarius. And Mercury moves very close, very, very close to Saturn, as if they are in a war. I just think that's unbelievably significant. Now, the next constellation is Capricorn, and that is called the sea goat. It's ruled by Saturn, which we usually refer to as Satan. So it starts on December 22nd. On the actual date of February 12th, Saturn will go into Sagittarius, which depicts the Antichrist being conquered or possessed by Satan. It's showing symbolic meaning here when Satan is going to possess the Antichrist. This is also in the dead of the winter, and the winter always represents the dark hours of a daylight period. But I think there's an awakening that happens, and it's represented by that sign of Aquarius when there's the pouring out of the water, the pouring out of knowledge, of people seeking it. When we have the story of the 10 virgins, 5 of them had enough oil, 5 did not have enough oil. These 10 virgins will awake from their stupor because they were sleeping. Is that not correct? and that's what's going to happen. That's what it's representation of. Now, last constellation that we have time to cover, and that is Mars or Pisces. And Mars is, like we mentioned before, is the god of war. In the month of March, we call that that represents obviously Mars. Now, on April the 4th, during the constellation of Pisces, Mars itself will pass close to Saturn. Saturn stays in Sagittarius, and Jupiter will move very close, meaning the Messiah will move very close. So I think this is really very interesting that Mars will move very close to Saturn at that time. And that's actually in reference to, I think, a war starting, that Satan is involved in a war being started. So I'm not saying that a war is going to happen in March, that certain events going to happen on certain times. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that God has a message that he wrote in the book of Revelations that is going to be played out. And that message is going to be played out in the sky starting in 2017.
Absolutely, Linda, because we know that the book of Revelation, which is Hazan in the Hebrew, is a vision. It's a vision of the end time. It's the unveiling of future end time events. Elohim gave this to John. However, Yeshua is the one doing the revealing. So what Yeshua says in Matthew 24, he also repeats in the book of Revelation. Well, I think that a lot of people that may be watching this program are asking themselves why the tribulation has to come at all. But if we're familiar with the scriptures all the way from the beginning to the end, it repeatedly is Yahweh pleading to his people to come back to him, to return to his ways, to return to his Torah. And there's so many scriptures. I only picked one, and it's in Ezekiel 11:12, and it says, "And you shall know that I am Yahweh, for you have not walked in my laws, or executed my right rulings, but you have done according to the Gentiles, which are all around you." So there is definitely, you were talking about wars and battles, there's definitely a battle coming. But for us, it's not going to be one. For Yahweh's people, it won't be one with physical weapons, but with spiritual ones. We must bring every thought captive to his will. Focus on his abilities to take care of things, not ours. The only way to overcome fear, doubt, and worry, to be bold and to stay strong, is by winning the battle that's in our minds. Philippians 4:8 says, it tells us how we should think. And it says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is righteous, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good report, if there is anything upright or praiseworthy, think or meditate on these things. Ephesians 6:10 says, be strong in the Lord and in the mightiness of his strength. 6:11 says, put on the full armor of Elohim so that you will have power to stand against the schemes of Satan, the enemy. So the real enemy is not one of flesh, but of principalities and powers of the air, rulers of darkness. We all desire life and peace. Become spiritually minded through Yahweh's word, and you will have life and peace in the midst of the storm. The battle belongs to the Lord, Adonai.
Thank you so much, Sandy. I really appreciate that. And if you have any questions about these constellations that we covered, please email me at lwatson44@cox.net. And with that, we're going to go ahead and say good night to all and blessings to all. Good night, Sandy.
Good night.